This is George Dionne with Metal Express Radio, and I'm here with Joe Walsh of Echo Park. How you doing, Joe?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
Great. Excellent.
Cool.
Let's get right into it. I ask everybody the same question first. If I knew absolutely nothing about Echo Park, how would you describe the band's music to me?
I guess we're sort of a guitar-driven rock band that comes from four very different places. So it's kind of it's cool. It's a cool dynamic with the band. There's two older members that are into more old school music, and two younger members that are into more newer music. So we've all pulled together with our guitar influences. I think we're all probably bonded by some of the more rocky David Bowie type stuff, but some punk influences, bit of Placebo, some Idlewild, sort of that sort of vibe, I guess.
Okay, I'm from the U.S., so is your style of music something that's popular in New Zealand?
It's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting question. New Zealand's got a really healthy cross sort of. There's a bit of everything going on here. I guess we would be defined mostly as a sort of a reggae type of roots nation, really. But I think the subgenres, whether they be metal or sort of more classic sort of rock like ours, it's all very, very healthy. And I do one thing I've found. I mean, I'm originally Irish, but I've been here sort of 15, 16 years. One thing I found really interesting about New Zealand that really stood out for me when I moved here was that people don't seem to be defined by genres. So people will go to a festival, it's a day festival or a weekend festival, and actually be into bands from all different genres rather than just sticking to maybe one stage that's a rock stage. Or so it's quite interesting. You know, there's a maybe because it's a small community in a small country, there's a bit more of people are less sort of set in their own genres. So it's an interesting dynamic over here, really. So I think that makes it healthier for bands like us who are in a rock band that maybe aren't, you know, it's not the biggest genre here, but we still get well supported because people are just into their music sort of full stop, really.
Yeah, that's excellent. It would be great if there was more stuff like that in the US, like a multi-genre.
Even in UK and Ireland, where I'm originally from too, it was a big shock to the system for me to go to a day festival and just see people really digging. You know, probably our biggest rock band in New Zealand would be a band called She Had. You know, people are loving She Had, right down to loving reggae acts, right down to loving even sort of dance acts and stuff here. So people are really open to just good music, which is great. So it does make bands like ours, which are probably a bit smaller genre, just thrive, which is great.
Well, speaking of great music, your new album Horizons comes out in a few days.
Yeah, man.
You must be excited about that, first of all.
Oh, so stoked. Yeah, it's been a bit of a labor of love, this one. So it's really funny because we wrote it and recorded it quicker than we've ever done, respectively. All of them, the four of us in the band, have never recorded and written an album so quickly in any projects we've ever been involved with. But then it's been the longest it's ever been between finishing an album and getting it out for various reasons. So we've sat on it now for almost 2 years. So to have it out is just amazing, you know?
So you must have a meaning behind the album's title because there's no songs called Horizon.
No, so that sort of came about because our second album, No Hope, had a sort of two lives for us. That had a life here in New Zealand, and then we did quite well in Europe. We got picked up by a label in Italy that really liked a couple of the singles and got picked up on major radio over there. So the album sort of got a second life in Europe. After it had already had a cycle here for us. So we sort of sat on that second album for quite a long time. And then at the end of it, it finished with a tour through Italy and some shows in the UK and Ireland. And we came back to New Zealand, and our founding guitar player, Joel, was just time for him to leave. His life had moved on from the band. So we got a friend of ours, Alex, who's a really young, fresh, vibrant female guitar player who just she jumped into the rehearsals, and it just felt like it was so fresh that I think a lot of bands that change band members, they can either, the band member can come in and be a direct replacement for the person that's left, or they come in and be completely new and fresh. And we sort of felt, well, let's just, instead of learning maybe 20 of our older songs, let's learn 4 or 5 and write a bunch of new ones and see where that takes us. So literally from then on, I think maybe Alex had only been in the band maybe 10 or 12 weeks by the time we had basically had the album written. So Horizon came around, where it was like everybody felt like there was a new thing. We were all moving in the same direction, even though, I was sort of thought I was the main songwriter in the band. But then this was the first time writing with Brian and Alex, who are songwriters of their own other respective projects. So it was like this whole thing where we were all pulling in the same direction. So I think I had said Horizons, and everyone had sort of settled on that. And then Alex went, I think Horizons are really just taking the S off and making it like this singular vision that we had. So that's kind of where it came from, really. So it was like something that we could see happening, and it was like a new fresh start. So that was basically where that pulled from.
Excellent. The first single from the album is All Eyes on Me. Is that also sort of a battle cry for the new version of the band, or is there another meaning behind it?
No, that was an interesting one. That actually came from the lyrics to that was spawned from I had flown to the States from Auckland and New Zealand here. So no matter where you go in the States, you tend to fly to LA or Houston, one of the hubs from New Zealand. So I was in Houston Airport, which is just in the international transit, which was just one of the biggest airports I've ever been in. And I was in a bar in one of the airport bars, and it was just, you know what it's like, you're from the States when you're not from the States, and there's so many news networks being beamed in one bar. It was like kind of like watching 4 versions of the same story being told by this. It was just, and I was a bit jet lagged, so it was all a bit crazy. So the All Eyes on Me was kind of like, I felt like I was in a bit of a George Orwell novel or something, trying to get a grip on what was real, what I was watching on the TV. But the rest of life in the States was just going on as normal. So that's kind of, it was a bit of just one of those sort of weird things for me, where I was kind of like, this is crazy, So yeah, that's where I came from.
Feeder band member Grant Nicholas actually does guest vocals on this.
Yeah.
How did you get him involved?
So yeah, that's really a real trip of all the stars aligning real quickly. So I'm a huge Feeder fan. I've been a Feeder fan since their first album. So Ekko Park, our band name, is actually taken from their third album. I named the band after their third album. So the spelling of the name is slightly different because our band started during the MySpace era. So you needed to steal your own website, and there was about 20 Ekko Parks at that stage. So that's where the whack spelling came from. But basically what had happened was, when we were tracking this, our producer here in New Zealand is actually a Welsh guy who knew the Feeder guys from back in the sort of early 90s. But Chris Sheldon, who we got to mix this record, who mixed like My Hero and Everlong for the Foos, he was mixing the current Feeder record at that time. And Greg had been in contact with Chris and sort of said, look, we've got this band in New Zealand, we've got really fresh new record, and we'd love you to mix it. So when he agreed to mix it, he was actually mixing Tallulah, which is the Feeder album. So I think time just sort of moved, and the songs sounded really great. And Greg just said, look, I'm going to send 4 or 5 of these songs to Grant from Feeder and see if he's digging them. And I think obviously because Chris was mixing both of our records at the same time, there was probably a bit of Grant give it a bit of respect because Chris was mixing it. So Grant came back to us with his choice of All Eyes on Me to be the song he wanted to play around on. So that's kind of one of the reasons why we've sat on this for so long, because it probably added 6 months into it to get him recorded. And then when we realized it sounded so great, we wanted him in the video, but he was on tour with Feeder. So it took probably another 8 or 9 months to get him shot for the video in London. So, but it was one of those things that was worth sitting on, Feeder for me, just a real important reason why I picked up the guitar. I'm in a band. So it's just mad for me to be sharing a single with him, pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The second single is Uh-Oh.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that song?
So that's a cool one. That's actually, again, so that's an American movie called Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which I really loved. And I went to a film festival here to see that. And sometimes the songs, I like putting myself in characters of books or movies that I really like, just to sort of play around with what's going on in their life. So the narrator of the song "Uh-Oh" is Sam Rockwell's character, who's a little bit of a simple sort of guy who goes from the villain to the hero. And I thought "uh-oh" was one of those sort of comical terms for somebody that's kind of realized what they're doing. It was "uh-oh," so he's a bit of a simple sort of guy. So I narrated this song as a viewpoint of this guy who sort of you think is a bit of a simpleton at the start of the movie, who actually turns around to be a bit of a hero at the end. So that's where the lyrics for that song came from.
Okay. I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard good things about it.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, it's really spectacular piece of American filmmaking, I think. Yeah, it's incredible.
Are there any other songs on the album that stand out to you? I mean, I know you obviously like them all, but...
Yeah, I think there's a couple on them that, with having Alex, new member in, and Brian has been on bass for quite a while. But as I say, that second album had such a life. Brian actually hadn't recorded the second album, but he was in the band on the tours of the second album. So this was the first writing session with these four people. So I think what's really exciting for me is there was definitely a couple of our songs that went into the rehearsal room being my songs, but came out at the end being four people's songs, and most of my parts were taken away except maybe the melody or something. So what's really exciting for me on this is that this record's it's a real collaborative Echo Park effort. So I really like Go Stop Go or No Courage for Courage, or Clan, which is the last song, because I don't think any form of Echo Park would ever have written those songs without having these four members. So that's really exciting for me. I think it's really fresh for people who like our band here and around the world that have followed us. I think they'll be quite surprised by what's on the record.
How did you find your new band members?
So Brian and myself are in another band here in New Zealand and have been for sort of 12, 14 years or something like that. And Alex was actually a student who maybe, I think 5 or 6 years ago, there's a famous venue in Auckland called the Auckland Town Hall, and the the Rolling Stones had played in it on one of their first tours. So they did not the Stones, but the Auckland Town Hall did a 50th anniversary of the Stones playing on this. Stones and the Beatles playing on this stage. So they did this thing where bands had to play with a student who was studying music. So it was like getting students up on this big stage. And so Alex was actually the student that played with me and Brian's other band. And we just had a bit of fun playing a couple of Stones covers and sort of giving a bit of kudos to those bands for coming to New Zealand back in the 60s or whatever, So we just stayed in touch with Alex, and she's just an incredibly creative young woman who was just wasn't in a rock band at the time. So we reached out, and she's actually a filmmaker as well. So she's directed and conceptualized the 2 videos for All Eyes on Me and Uh-oh as well. So just a really creative and inspiring person to have in the band. So we were stoked that she joined. And she's an Echo Park fan first and foremost. She'd been to the shows before as a punter, so it was great that she joined us as a member,
Yeah, you're releasing the album on Dinner
Friday.
for Wolves Records.
Yeah.
On Friday. Did you find Dinner for Wolves, or did they find you?
The most random thing is, this is so crazy. So we have a mutual friend who actually is part of Pearl Jam's crew. He's actually an Australian guy who lives in Canada, but works full time in Seattle for Pearl Jam. So random. So Matt, when we had finished the album, I was just chatting to Matt and sort of saying, look, this album's really, it feels really stronger than anything we've done before, and I'd love to get somebody over this side of the world to have a good look at it for us. So he was like, oh, you got to talk to Rick, who I used to go to school with. And he messaged Rick, who's one of the directors of Dinner for Wolves, and he was actually a keynote speaker at a music like some sort of seminar or something in Auckland in New Zealand. And when Matt texted him, he was actually in New Zealand. So the next day I just went to Auckland in the city and had a beer with him. And what turned out, as all good meetings do, started with one beer and led to about 10 beers. And we just stayed in touch, and sort of planets aligned, and things moved well. And Rick really liked what we were doing and how proactive we were. And we were super keen to work with those guys. And then I think as sort of lockdowns started to happen at the start of this year, Rick and Chris from Dinner for Wolves had a bit more time to actually, rather than find someone else for us to put the record out, they went, right, well, let's all do it as a team. So that's how it's ended up with Dinner for Wolves, which has been great. I mean, it's been really, really great guys. It's awesome working with people who are just digging your music too, you know, rather than just trying to sell a product. So when you're having excited conversations about how cool videos are and how good the artwork looks, and it's exciting, you know?
Yeah.
Especially after sitting on a record for 2 years, you know, we're not like we just want to push it out and forget about it. We're actually genuinely excited about it, which is great.
Do you find it's a little risky releasing an album in the middle of the COVID lockdowns because you can't tour to support it?
Well, in New Zealand, we're lucky because we're in the middle of a 10, 12-day lockdown at the minute because we've had a short spike, but touring has been fully unrestricted in New Zealand here for 102 days. So there has been arena shows and stuff here. So we have a 23-date national tour set to start on the 4th of September. So fingers crossed we get to do that. But it's actually been interesting because people seem to be a lot more engaged in the lockdown, in that, you know, people are Zooming or Skyping or WhatsApping, and people are sort of, you know, looking for content. So it's actually been maybe a bit of a blessing in disguise for us that we had the videos ready to go, which was good. I think, you know, bands are obviously struggling who can't, under restrictions, make new videos or whatever, but we had the videos ready to go. So we had a bit of a project that just needed to press the play button. So we did that. So I think in many ways it's worked in our favor, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Time will tell, right?
Time will tell. Yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you get airplay in New Zealand, you tour around New Zealand, you do some Europe shows and stuff like that. Is America on your conquest list?
Honestly, we've just sort of said we wanted to play and tour wherever there was an audience. And that's always been our goal. And I think a funny thing for me is, like, studio time and recording was always like, as much as I enjoyed it, I'm not a musician who, you know, sits in a studio room and tries to make sounds and all that sort of stuff. To me, where we've got the sort of punk ethos where we write songs just so people know them, and then we want to go out and play them, and we'll just play everywhere and anywhere. I mean, obviously New Zealand has got a great gateway into Asia. I'd love to tour Asia. I'd love to get into the States. So it's just really, you know, obviously there's so much music out there. It's difficult, but we've got a good team now, and I think, you know, our profile's rising quite a lot with this record already. So I'm hoping that we can jump on some of these tours around the world that might not have been open to us before. Europe happened, I guess. Obviously, I've got Irish connections originally from Ireland, so that helped us over there. The Italy thing was a real surprise. That was just someone had picked up a single, and we signed for the last album, so that was great. So you never know. You just never know. You know, something might just pop up, but a band might see us, and we might end up supporting them on tour, and that's the next thing we do. So that's basically, you just got to put yourself out there at the minute, you know.
Yeah. You've been sitting on the album, you said, for 2 years. So have you been working on new material? Not to get too far ahead, but
yeah, no, we have because we do sort of do that. But it was always, it's been a funny 2 years in many ways. It wasn't frustrating is the wrong word, because we always knew that it was for the better of the album. It wasn't. We weren't sitting on it because we couldn't find a label, or we couldn't get the right person to get it out. We were really proactive in that time. So we got all the artwork done. We got the vinyls made. We got the videos made. We rebranded, got new logos, got new merch. So it was like we were always planning for the release of it. So even when the COVID thing hit and Dinner for Wolves came on, they sort of, you know, we had the package ready. It wasn't like we were like, okay, let's start looking at releasing. So we had everything ready to go. So the 2 years was pretty full with those songs, and we have toured them. Now we've done 2 tours playing the songs that are on Horizon. So it's great that we've toured them and they're tour ready. And so obviously the next step will be new music, but I think we're really excited now to get out and play these songs again with people knowing them. So it'll give these songs a bit more of a new lease of life, I think. So it is exciting. I do understand the question that we've been sitting on the songs for 2 years, but I think now that people will know them, and we've had a couple of singles with great videos and stuff, hopefully there's a new lease of life for them. So that's what we're excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you had any issues in the music industry by sharing a name with the Eagles' Joe Walsh?
Oh man, absolute nightmare. Absolute, it's a disaster. It's truly a disaster. I mean, I've tried all sorts of things. I've had Joe Walsh DC for Dublin City, and I've had all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, your name is your name. And I think maybe at the time, when I was starting out, I was a bit younger. Sort of my peers weren't really you didn't really know of the Eagles or what anything. When I was sort of like listening to Feeder or Oasis or Pearl Jam or whatever, back in the 90s. But as I've got older, it's definitely become a bit of an issue, especially when you have people, Americans and Canadians and UK folk who are well into their music and know of it. They just, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. I don't know how to play any Eagles songs, which is even worse. I can't even pretend,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's all I got for you today. Thanks for talking with Metal Express Radio.
Wicked.